middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu.
Somewhere Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems.
चुन चुन करके हिसाब लेना ये मेरी फितरत है.
Why should it be a problem if I'm smart enough to have multiple options? You should be admiring me.
भारत झुकने वाला भी नहीं.
The rise of India will be determined by India. It will be determined by our strength, not by the mistakes of others.
The old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy.
Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and in this video we are going to talk about India-Russia trade has a serious problem. Now what that serious problem is, so let's talk about that. Okay, see, India's foreign minister Dr. S. Jaishankar right now, he is in Russia to talk about trade, to talk about security, defense, all good stuff. But here's the thing, India-Russia trade has exploded, right? But it has exploded only in one direction. Now, if you look at the numbers, you find that in the year 2021 to 2022, between that, bilateral trade was only around $13.1 billion, where India exported 3.25 billion, India imported $9.87 billion, and trade deficit was roughly, I would say, $6.6 billion according to Exim Bank. Then after Russia-Ukraine war started, then things changed. And in the year 2024 to 2025, bilateral trade had surged almost to $68.7 billion. Once again, what happened? Indian exports $4.88 billion, Indian imports $63.84 billion, trade deficit of what? $59 billion. Now you have to understand this, that India has overall trade deficit, that when you do import minus export and you'll see the difference, so it's around $300 billion. Okay, out of which $100 billion trade deficit comes from China and $59 billion trade deficit comes from Russia. Just from the two countries, 50% of the trade deficit comes. So in just 3 years, what happened? India exports to Russia increased by only about what? 50%. And Indian import from Russia increased roughly what? 6.5 times, I would say. Right? And that's where the real problem is. Trade grew fivefolds, all that happened. Indian export barely moved, right? From 3.25 billion to 4.88 billion. So probably $1 or $1.5 billion. That's it. If you take the round figures. But the imbalance has not disappeared. Bilateral trade is still around $59.9 billion in in this 2025 to 2026 fiscal year, with Russian goods continue to dominate the relationship. And why I'm saying that it is a serious problem? It's a serious problem because when the trade deficit, a massive trade deficit, comes from some close partners, and you cannot do anything about it, then that is a problem, right? Because it's a systemic dependency, something that India cannot just walk away from. And the impact of this dependency is that it hurts India's currency. Look at India's currency right now, rupees around 96 or so per dollar, like that, right? And that creates a serious problem because it puts a strain on India's foreign exchange. India has to deal with accordingly, then yes, it does, because if rupee becomes 96, then it does help India's exports and all. But it doesn't matter really. It doesn't matter how much you increase the export when the trade deficit is like locked, right? It's not changing. And that's where the problem is. So the question is that why did Russian exports to India scale massively, right? Why it became so large while Indian exports to Russia didn't? Or in a simple way, if you ask me, the important question is that why Russia does not import as much from India as much as India is importing from Russia, right? If India and Russia are very, very close partners, as they say, then don't you think that Russians should be at least trying to, they should try to maintain that trade imbalance, try to figure out a way to manage it, right? But that's not the case. And another impact is that if this continues, then what's going to happen is that India will have loads and loads of ruble sitting uh, in its foreign ex, and not even ruble. In fact, I think that because India buys oil in ruble, India pays in ruble, and ruble comes from what? When India exports it. So if India cannot export too much to Russia, then India won't have too much ruble, right? And when India won't have too much ruble, then India will have to spend some other currency. Some other currency. This is why India use dirham sometimes uh, something else, sometimes something else. That's how India has managed overall. But Russians haven't changed anything about the trade to actually address the trade imbalance. So what is going on here, right? So first of all, let's talk about why did Russian export scale while Indian export didn't? Or say reason number one why Russia really cannot import too much from India. Even if it wanted to, Russia just cannot do that. Like US can do or any other country. Is the biggest reason is the scale. Why? Because India's population is 1.4 billion. Okay, Russia's population is give take 148 million. All right, and uh, Russia sells things to India like crude oil, petroleum products, fertilizers, coking coal, sunflower oil, and metals, like all these things. What kind of metals? Metals, a specialized steel to make, for this is just an example I'm saying, a specialized steel that is used to make icebreakers. And what India sells to Russia? India sells Russia pharmaceuticals, chemicals, iron, steel, marine products, and just name other manufacturing goods. But the problem is this: when I say scale, lots of things Russia already produces by itself, and then lots of things Russia already imports from China. Okay, and because of this, even if India wanted to scale, uh, or even if India wanted to export to Russia, they won't be able to. Okay, and when you purchase oil, oil is always a massive import. See, so that's the difference. What India exports to Russia versus what India imports from Russia. Whatever India imports from Russia is a multi-billion dollar thing. Hey, it's a multi-billion dollar commodity or trade. Whereas what India exports to Russia, there is a choice in that thing. That Russia can choose to purchase less, or Russia can choose to purchase more. right? So when India purchases crude oil from Russia, then it's always a multi-billion dollar deal, right? Because the scale is huge, it has to be huge, there's nothing can be done. Whereas when India exports, then it Russia chooses based on the need demand, right? So this is the very important part that you have to understand. It's not always that Russians don't want to import, or Russians are not concerned or serious about India's trade deficit problem. Okay, so that's one reason. So the question is next is that why does oil create such a huge imbalance? The oil is fundamentally different from most of the things India exports, right? So India needs millions of barrels of crude oil, and after Hormuz happened, so India's requirement also grew, and India's per daily requirement is almost 5.5 million barrels per day. Okay, so and India only purchases, or say around, as far as latest data is concerned, it's like around 2.47 million barrels per day. That's what India actually imports from Russia. So because in this is and this is the number, right? And lots of people say, oh, India takes that oil and sells it to European Union and this and that. How India can sell that oil to European Union when it's not even exceeding India's domestic demand? Yes, India does sell, okay, because India imports oil from lots and lots of other countries, and you have to understand that refinery market has itself in itself is a very huge business. Okay, not every country has crude oil, and not every country has uh, refineries. So India has to acquire that market. Okay, so this is why India has to import. If India gets the cheaper import, then exporting the refined crude product from the cheaper import is increases the profit margin, right? There's huge margin of it. And if you look into the data, you find that India exported almost 48 to 50 billion dollars of refined crude product just last year. And out of that, I would say, let's if we remove the domestic demand, right? If you remove the domestic demand, whatever is left, you can say that okay, if India is purchasing, say, 60 some billion dollar worth of crude oil from Russia, and out of that, let's say India sells it, and so India can recover some money out of it from the exporting it, right? And let's say India recovers, say, $10 billion from it. So overall, still it goes up to what, 15 to 16 billion dollars, and still there is some imbalance left. And now Russians are actually importing that crude oil from India too. Why? Because Ukrainians bombed their certain storage and refineries, and because of that created a domestic shortage. Okay, so Russia asked India to export some of the things. So this is why you notice that oil demand is very huge. Okay, India was very cautious before Ukraine. In fact, after Russia Ukraine war, India was very cautious about it. But you have to understand this, that it's like a chess. Okay, you have to sometimes sacrifice your pieces to take advantage. So if you want to take advantage in the refined crude product market, which is a very huge market and there is lots and lots of margin in it, so what do? You have to go and purchase this, and if you don't, then somebody else will. It's very simple. Okay, so why not India? And that's exactly what India did. Okay, now, third reason I think why Russia is not able to import a lot from India is China. Okay. And the most important question that you have to ask is that why is China uh, getting the Russian market that India could be getting, right? You might have heard this news lots of times that, oh, now India is also, Russian markets are open for India and this and that. But you have to understand this, that Russians Russian market has this tendency that they don't overspend like Americans. Okay, America's population is 330 million, one fourth of India's population, but America imports four times more than India. Four times more than India. Why is that? Because of the dollar. They have to keep the dollar in circulation, so they import four times more than that, and this keeps their companies thriving too. If it's like, it's like you make the product and then you go and you import your own thing from somewhere else. That's pretty much, I'm just giving you a layman idea of it. Okay, so why Russia imports from China? There are many reasons to it. Okay, and some of the reasons are, I would say, geopolitical, and some are geographical, which I'm going to talk about it later on. But for Russia, purchasing from China has its own advantage. Number one is that um, China is sort of, you can say that China has bigger risk appetite than India. Why? Because China is a bigger economy. And so China, I mean, lots of times what happens is that countries don't even put pressure on China simply because they don't want to get into this whole trade war with China. Okay. And the next reason is that after, say, Western companies, they withdrew or say reduced exposure to Russia after Russia-Ukraine war, right? So Russia all of a sudden needed alternative suppliers, right? Machinery, electronics, automobiles, industrial equipments, manufactured products, all that. And Chinese manufacturing it's way ahead. Okay, they can build things really really fast. So the moment market opens somewhere, the moment there is a void, the gap that needs to be filled, Chinese move in so fast that before you can even blink your eye, Chinese are there. And I think the Chinese saw this. Chinese knew that since Russians are planning to get into this whole Ukraine war and all that, so Chinese expected that too. Because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, then probably President Putin had this long discussion with President Xi Jinping. And Xi Jinping may not have said anything at that time, but I'm pretty sure that Chinese were ready, that if sanctions are applied, then we will move in. Now, when sanctions are applied and Chinese moved in, then see, advantage is this. It goes into the next thing. Okay, next is that logistics advantage. Number one, right? So China border is basically China and Russia, their borders touch each other, right? So they can bypass lots of things. One of those things is maritime insurance. They can bypass any kind of, trade related insecurities or problems, right? Just because of the land route. And because borders, they touch each other, so they can import and export. They can set up pipelines. There are lots and lots of natural gas pipelines that go from Russia to China. Then there is a whole entire export supply chain. All that is set between Russia and China. Okay, China and Russia, basically they share more than 4,000 kilometers of land border, right? So the goods can actually move directly by road and rail between Chinese industrial centers and Russia. All that can happen. And Chinese currency yuan is there. So if when Russian sanctions were applied, then China and Russia, they started to trade in yuan and ruble. What happened? It helped both of the countries because Russians could use that yuan and send it somewhere else. They were always open with that. So that has been a very good advantage for China. Okay. And this is precisely why India and Russia, they keep discussing the international north-south corridor, Chennai-Vladivostok corridor, and other connectivity projects. Because if they can do that, then chances are that that trade will grow, and it's not going to grow in one direction. But still, it's not going to be like Russia and China, because China always has that scale. Okay, manufacturing. So it will take at least, I would say, India. Can India catch up with China? My calculation is this. All right, my calculation is that India can catch up with China in next 10 years. Now, some of you will be like, uh, how is that possible? This, that. See, it's possible because India has one advantage that China doesn't have, and China cannot even actually reverse it or fix it. It's not a machinery, it's the population, young population. India has 600 million of the military age population that can do things, that can do magic. China doesn't have that. So sooner or later, what's going to happen is that Chinese manufacturing, Chinese industries are going to suffer because of this. Okay. And yes, China, that's why Chinese are working into the robotics and all that. But if you work into robotics, what's going to happen is that it's going to create unemployment problem in China. Okay. So that's a whole different discussion. But what I'm saying here is that that eventually, once India builds its manufacturing capacity, industrial capacity, I think that India-Russia trade will eventually get to a point where this trade deficit is not going to be that huge. Okay. Then comes what else? Like I gave you the 4 reasons. What else is actually preventing Indian exports from growing? Indian exports from growing into Russia. The one problem is payments problem. Like I said already, that Western sanctions have complicated banking settlement and correspondent banking, relationships. Why? Because India now has to, if India wants to trade with Russia, then Indian companies have to create alternative companies just to trade with Russia. India cannot go and create a company and then that company is trading with Russia and that company is trading with United States or some other country. Why? Because US immediately, as soon as US finds out, US just sanctions those companies. Okay. And lots of Indian companies have been sanctioned because of this. You have to understand the game here. Okay. So that's one reason. Then market access, like I said, right? Then India and Russia themselves acknowledge tariff and non-tariff barriers, including regulatory restrictions, which affects the trade. So they have that tariff, non-tariff, all that problem because India and Russia don't have any kind of free trade agreement as such, right? Then comes your insurance and sanctions compliance and all that. So, and India's borders don't align with China, with Russian border. It's not like good old time when Soviet Union was there. When Soviet Union was there, then it was the case. It was easy. But after the Soviet Union is gone, now borders don't align. So what happens? Now India has to figure out alternatives. And that requires what? Insurance. Then you have to figure out sanctions compliance. This is the reason, right? This is the reason India started Bharat the maritime insurance and all that. All this game, right? So when you see things happening separately, but when you go start to look into it closely, then you find out what exactly is going on. Those things are created to address a problem. Okay, and every trade comes with these things. These are all the package deals with the trade, right? Payment system, market access, insurance, sanctions, security, all that is part of that import and export trade. So this is what happened, and this is another reason why Indian exports are not growing in Russia. So then some of you are very smart. You may ask like, hey, then why does India keep buying Russian oil? Well, like I said earlier, India still needs the crude. If India doesn't buy it from Russia, then somebody else will buy it from Russia. China will buy the cheap crude from Russia, right? And and if India doesn't buy from Russia, then where else India is going to buy from? India will have to move to Iraq, Saudi Arabia, UAE, US, Brazil. All that is expensive affair. You already saw what's going on in Hormuz, right? So, um, so India has to buy it from Russia because there is a guarantee in it. It comes with a guarantee that oil will be delivered. Okay, oil will be delivered simply because of the trade route, and so that's the thing, right? And India will continue to buy it simply because India does not want to lose a partner like Russia. Lots of things are there, and lots of nuances are there that I mean, if I start to discuss all that, then video will be very long, and lots of you won't even watch it, right? So so these things, these are some of the problems. So India has to buy it because India has to maintain and grow its refined crude product market, because that's the future. Okay, that is the future. But eventually what you're going to see is that Russians are not going to be too reliant on Chinese, and I think that Russians are also helping India with Eurasian Free Trade Agreement as well. So with Eurasian Free Trade Agreement, what's going to happen is that India can actually improve its currency demand over there as well, and they accept your Eurasian Union also. They also accept the ruble as well. So that market is going to be there too, but it's not a very huge market. That's going to be probably $5 billion or $6 billion. I've done the calculation on that as well. So total, if you will combine, that's going to be like $10 billion or so. But still, hey, something is better than nothing. Your currency is growing, right? So that's a good thing. So lots of things are there that needs to be adjusted, and if Russians can actually come up with some serious things, so that they can take some serious steps to bring down this trade deficit, then it's going to be very helpful for India, okay, and Russia, their relationship too. So this is it, guys. These are some of the things, and this is a serious problem, as much as I would say. I mean, it doesn't sound very serious, but it is a serious problem. Okay, so this is it for this video, guys. I hope you like something, learn something, like it, love it, whatever. Subscribe it. Thank you. I'll talk to you guys in another video. Take care.